West Texas, August 1944. The heat shimmered across endless plains where cattle grazed under skies too wide to comprehend. At a ranch 40 miles from the nearest POW camp, a German woman stood in a kitchen that smelled of bacon and coffee, her hands trembling as she cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet. She had been told Americans were brutal. Instead, a rancher's wife named Margaret handed her an apron and said, "You'll be staying in the room upstairs." Outside, barbed wire was nowhere to be seen. Just horizon. Just freedom that felt more terrifying than any cell. Before we continue this remarkable story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of history lovers from around the world, so drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, Berlin, or anywhere in between, this story belongs to all of us. It's a reminder that history isn't just about battles and borders. It's about people. The woman's name was Elsa Schmidt, a nurse from Hamburg who had treated wounded soldiers in Tunisia before capture. She had expected chains, brutality, starvation. The propaganda had been clear. Americans tortured prisoners, worked them to death, showed no mercy. But standing in that kitchen, watching Margaret refill her coffee cup without asking, she realized something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Everything she had been told was a lie. And if that was a lie, what else had been? The war had reached Texas in ways no one predicted, not with bombs or beaches, but with trains carrying women whose faces bore the weariness of a continent collapsing. These were not soldiers. They were nurses, clerks, radio operators, captured across North Africa and Italy as the Wehrmacht crumbled. By late 1943, Camp Hearn, southeast of Dallas, held over 4,000 German prisoners. Most were men. But several dozen women arrived, segregated behind their own fences, sleeping in converted barracks while guards debated what to do with them. The countryside needed workers. Pearl Harbor had pulled the young men overseas. Their fathers, too old for combat, worked themselves into exhaustion. Ranches stretched for miles with barely enough hands to manage the herds, fix fences, harvest cotton. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment. What it didn't account for was the American labor shortage so desperate that ranchers began asking questions the War Department didn't want to answer. A rancher named John Brennan submitted a request through proper channels. Could female POWs work his property under supervision? The response took weeks. When it came, it was cautious approval with conditions so specific they filled 3 pages. The women would work. They would be housed separately. Guards would check in daily. No fraternization, no gifts, no personal relationships. None of those rules survived contact with Texas hospitality. The first group arrived on a morning when the sun turned the air into something you could taste. Dust rose from the truck tires, coating mesquite trees along the dirt road to Brennan's ranch. 5 women stepped down, ages ranging from 19 to 34. They wore faded Wehrmacht issue clothing too heavy for Texas heat. Their faces showed exhaustion, but also something else. Confusion. Margaret Brennan stepped off the porch, wiping flour from her hands. She looked at the women, then at the guard accompanying them, a corporal named Davis. "They speak English?" Margaret asked. "Some," Davis said. "Enough." Margaret nodded. "All right then. You girls hungry?" The question hung in the air. Elsa translated quietly for the others. Hunger was familiar. Kindness was not. "Yes," Elsa said in accented but clear English. "We are hungry." Margaret smiled. "Good, because I made too much breakfast and it's getting cold." Inside, the kitchen smelled like a memory of home. Bacon, eggs, biscuits with butter melting into golden pools. Coffee so rich it made the women's eyes water. They sat at a long wooden table, staring at plates piled higher than any meal they had seen in 2 years. John Brennan sat at the head, his weathered face unreadable. He said, "Grace." They bowed their heads. Then they ate. When it was over, Elsa set down her napkin and spoke carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. We did not expect this." Margaret paused, meeting the younger woman's eyes. "Expect what?" Elsa hesitated. "Kindness." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron. "Well, You're here now. War's over there, not here. You'll work hard. We'll treat you fair. That's the deal. The women were shown to a bunkhouse behind the main house. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean. Each bed had sheets that smelled of soap and sunshine. A window looked out over pastures where horses grazed. That night, Elsa sat on her bunk and wrote in a small diary she had hidden from camp inspections. Today I felt human again. I don't know what to do with that feeling. The work began the next morning. Cleaning, cooking, mending fences. The women moved with military efficiency, years of discipline making them reliable even in unfamiliar labor. But something unexpected happened. The Brennans talked to them. Not orders. Conversation. John explained the difference between Herefords and Longhorns while they mucked stalls. Margaret taught them to make biscuits from scratch, laughing when the dough came out too sticky. By the end of the first week, the formality began cracking. The youngest prisoner, Anna Weiss, 19 and terrified of horses, stood frozen at the corral while a mare named Copper snorted nearby. John walked over slowly. She won't bite. Here. He held out a sugar cube. Let her smell you first. Anna's hand shook. The mare's nose was soft as velvet. Anna laughed, a sound so unexpected it startled even her. In Berlin, I never saw a horse up close. John smiled. Well, you're a long way from Berlin now. That night, Corporal Davis stopped by for his daily inspection. He found the women on the porch shelling peas alongside Margaret, talking about recipes and weather. He filed his report. All prisoners accounted for, no issues. What he didn't write was how normal it all looked. How human. By midsummer, the arrangement had spread. Other ranchers requested workers. The War Department, quietly desperate to maintain agricultural output, approved more placements. Within months, over 30 German women were living on ranches across central Texas. The rules remained the same on paper. In practice, they dissolved like sugar in coffee. At the Henderson Ranch near Fredericksburg, a woman named Greta Hoffman discovered she had a gift for horses. Back in Germany, she had worked in a factory making radio parts. Here she spent mornings training colts, her voice low and steady. The ranch foreman, an older man named Carl who had lost his son at Normandy, watched her work with something like wonder. "You got away with them," he said. Greta replied in halting English. "My grandfather bred horses. Before the war." The women learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings when fog hung low over fields, the midday heat that made even breathing feel like work, the evenings when the sky turned colors that had no names. They learned to rope, to ride, to read weather in the way clouds formed. Some discovered they were better at this life than the one they had left behind. But the transformation wasn't one-sided. The ranch families changed too. Margaret Brennan had lost a nephew at Anzio. When the war started, she had imagined Germans as monsters, faceless and cruel. Then Elsa showed her photographs of her family in Hamburg, killed in an RAF bombing raid. 2 sisters, a mother, all gone. Margaret held the pictures, seeing faces that could have been anyone's family. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elsa folded the photographs carefully. War makes everyone sorry. That's all it does. The realization spread quietly through the community. At church socials, ranch wives mentioned the German women who worked their land. At first, the conversations were guarded. They're hard workers. But gradually, the language shifted. Greta fixed the windmill yesterday. Anna made the best apple strudel I've ever tasted. They stopped being prisoners and started being people. Not everyone approved. In town, there were whispers. Men who had fought overseas bristled at the idea of enemy women living comfortably while their buddies died in France. A minister in San Antonio gave a sermon condemning the fraternization. Letters reached military headquarters demanding an end to the program, but the ranchers pushed back. At a town meeting in July 1944, John Brennan stood before his neighbors and spoke plainly. "I needed help. Government sent help. These women work harder than any hands I've hired in 30 years. They don't complain. They don't cause trouble. As far as I'm concerned, they've earned their place here." An older veteran, missing his left arm from the First War, stood up. "They're Nazis, John." Brennan's jaw tightened. Maybe they were, but they're not now. You talk to them, you'll see. They're as sick of Hitler as we are. It was true. In the privacy of bunkhouses, the women spoke about Germany with something between grief and rage. They had believed in the fatherland once, in victory, in all the lies Goebbels had fed them. Then came the defeats, the shortages, the bombs, the realization that everything they had been promised was ash. Anna confessed one night to Margaret that she had joined the Bund Deutscher Mädel at 14. "We sang songs about the Führer. We thought he would save us. I was a child. I didn't know." Margaret set down her sewing. "None of us know much when we're young. What matters is what you do when you grow up and realize you were wrong." By late summer, a widow named Ruth Morrison invited Greta to join the family for Sunday dinner. Not as a worker, as a guest. Greta sat at the table in a borrowed dress and said grace in German. Then they ate pot roast and talked about nothing important. The weather, the coming harvest, a colt born that week. Afterward, Ruth's youngest daughter asked Greta to read her a bedtime story. Greta chose a German fairy tale, translating as she went. The girl fell asleep before the ending. Greta sat there in the dim lamplight, watching the child breathe, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not break. Open. The War Department found out in October. A routine inspection revealed that the carefully constructed boundaries between prisoners and civilians had dissolved almost completely. German women were attending church services, eating meals with families, sleeping in ranch houses instead of segregated quarters. The report reached a colonel named Harold Jenkins, who had seen combat in the Pacific. He read the accounts with mounting fury. "These are enemy nationals," he said, "not guests, prisoners of war." An emergency order was drafted. All female POWs working on ranches were to be returned to Camp Hearn immediately. No exceptions. The program was to be terminated. The order was scheduled to take effect November 1st, but someone leaked the decision. When John Brennan heard, he drove straight to the nearest military office and demanded to see whoever was in charge. He found a captain named Miller. "You're shutting us down," Brennan said. Miller looked up, startled. "Sir, I can't discuss ongoing military decisions." Brennan leaned forward. "I've got 5 women on my property who have worked harder than any hands I've ever hired. They've caused 0 trouble. And now you're telling me they're going back to a camp because someone in Washington got their feelings hurt?" Miller hesitated. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Brennan said. "But here's what I know. Those women are more American now than they ever were German. They've seen what freedom looks like. You send them back to wire fences, you're just proving Hitler right about us." The argument didn't work. Bureaucracy had its own momentum. But Brennan wasn't alone. Other ranchers made calls, wrote letters, contacted congressmen. They argued economics, labor shortages. But beneath the practical arguments was something simpler. They didn't want to send the women back because they had stopped thinking of them as enemies. The night before the women were scheduled to leave, a delegation of ranchers, over 40 strong, arrived at Camp Hearn demanding a meeting with the camp commander, Major Wallace. They filled his office, speaking over each other until Wallace raised his hand for silence. "Gentlemen," he said, "I understand your concerns, but my orders come from—" John Brennan interrupted. "Men who never set foot in Texas, men who don't understand what's happening out here." Wallace leaned back. "And what is happening?" The room went quiet. Finally, Ruth Morrison spoke. "We're winning the war their way, tanks and guns, but we're winning a different war too, the kind that matters after the shooting stops. Those women came here hating us. Now they don't. That's worth something." Wallace was career military, 30 years of following orders, but he had also seen the letters the women received from Germany describing devastation. He had read their files, noting the declining references to Nazi ideology. "I'll make a call," he said finally. "No promises." The call went to division headquarters, then to Washington. Meanwhile, November 1st came and went. The women stayed on the ranches working while their fate hung in limbo. Days stretched into weeks. Then in early December, new orders arrived. The program would continue, but with stricter oversight. The women would remain prisoners, but they would also remain on the ranches. When Wallace delivered the news, Elsa asked the question they were all thinking. Why? Wallace hesitated. Because enough people in Washington realize that peace starts before the war ends. Maybe the best way to defeat Nazism isn't just on the battlefield. Maybe it's in places like this where people remember how to see each other as human. Spring 1945 brought news from Europe like hammer blows. Berlin falling, Hitler dead, Germany surrendering. In Texas, the German women heard the reports and felt things they couldn't name: relief, grief, exhaustion. The war was over, but they were still prisoners. The question became, what happened next? Camp Hearn began processing repatriations. Male prisoners eager to return home lined up for transport, but the women faced a different calculation. Return to what? Hamburg in ruins, Berlin a graveyard, families scattered. Meanwhile, in Texas, the cattle still needed tending. John Brennan told Elsa, "War's over, but the work isn't. You want to stay, you've got a place here, not as a prisoner, as a worker, with pay." The offer was repeated across dozens of ranches. Some women accepted immediately, others agonized. Anna wrote to an aunt in Bavaria asking about conditions. When the response came, it was stained and crumpled. "Stay in America if you can," her aunt wrote. "There is nothing for you here but ghosts." The process of transitioning from prisoner to immigrant worker took months. Paperwork, sponsorships, background checks. By late 1945, over 20 of the original women had secured permission to remain under agricultural work visas. Others chose to return, not from love of Germany, but from duty to rebuild. The farewells were harder than anyone expected. Margaret and Elsa embraced on the Brennan porch, both crying. "You taught me to make biscuits," Elsa said through tears. Margaret held her tighter. "You taught me that enemies are just people we haven't met yet." Greta stayed. She married Carl in a quiet ceremony at the Henderson Ranch. Greta wore a borrowed dress and carried wildflowers. The reception was barbecue and beer, fiddle music and laughter. Just two people starting over. Anna also remained, taking a job as a teacher in a small school outside Austin. She became known for patience, for telling stories about faraway places. Years later, students would remember her fondness for German fairy tales, though she never spoke of the war unless asked. By 1946, the last official POW camps in Texas closed. The towers came down. The wire was rolled up. Where thousands of prisoners had once lived behind fences, only grass remained. But the women who had stayed were everywhere, working ranches, teaching children, running small businesses, building lives from the wreckage of war. The transformation was quiet, but profound. In 1943, these women had been enemies. By 1946, they were neighbors. The shift happened gradually, through shared work and meals, through kindness repeated so often it became habit. Elsa eventually returned to Germany in 1947, determined to help rebuild Hamburg. Before she left, she gave Margaret her diary. "Keep this," she said, "so you remember that people can change. That forgiveness is possible." Margaret kept the diary for decades. When she died in 1978, her daughter donated it to a local historical society. Researchers discovered it in the 1990s. Elsa's words became primary source material for understanding how former enemies became friends. Anna gave one interview in 1982, aged 57, still teaching. The interviewer asked if she harbored resentment about being captured. Anna thought carefully. "I was angry once," she said. "But then I realized something. The war destroyed my country. If I had stayed in Berlin, I probably would have died. Instead, I was sent to Texas, where I learned English, where I discovered I could teach, where people gave me a second chance. The war took everything from millions. It gave me a future. How can I resent that?" The story remained largely unknown for decades. Military records were classified, personal letters scattered. The women rarely spoke of it, busy building normal lives. But in the 1990s, historians began piecing it together. What emerged complicated simple stories about World War II. The German women who came to Texas had believed Nazi lies. But belief crumbled when confronted with reality. They learned that Americans weren't savage, that the propaganda had been designed to dehumanize. More importantly, they learned what freedom actually meant. Not the Nazi version, but the messy, complicated American version, where hospitality was extended even to enemies, where second chances were possible. The ranchers learned too, that Germans weren't monsters, that ordinary people could be caught up in extraordinary evil without being evil themselves, that showing kindness to enemies didn't mean betrayal, that peace required more than stopping the shooting. It required building bridges across the craters war had created. Greta and Carl's marriage lasted 46 years. They had 3 children. The ranch still operates, run by Greta's grandson. On the wall hangs a photograph from 1945. Greta and Carl on their wedding day, both smiling despite everything. It's a picture of hope surviving horror. Anna taught for 38 years. She never forgot the moment in 1944 when she touched a horse for the first time, when John Brennan told her she was far from Berlin. She made it her mission to help other immigrant children. Former students remember her saying, "You're here now. That's what matters." The last of the women died in 2004. Anna Weiss, the girl who had been afraid of horses, who became a teacher. At her funeral, former students filled the church. Only one mentioned she had been a German prisoner of war. "She told me once," the student said, "that the worst thing about the war wasn't the bombs. It was the way it made everyone forget how to see each other. But Texas taught her to remember." The story should be better known. It's not dramatic like beach landings, but it reveals something crucial about how hatred ends. Not suddenly, in surrender ceremonies, but gradually, in kitchens and corral fences, in the accumulation of small kindnesses that erode propaganda like water wearing down stone. The War Department found out and tried to stop it. They failed, not because the ranchers were rebellious, but because human decency proved stronger than bureaucratic rules. The women who stayed built lives that defied categorization. They were prisoners who became workers, who became neighbors, who became Americans. Their story reminds us that people are not reducible to their worst moments, that exposure to kindness changes people in ways fear never can, that the ranchers who fed them, housed them, treated them as human, were practicing a form of warfare more effective than any bomb. They were defeating Nazism one breakfast at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of recognition that the woman in your kitchen was someone's daughter, someone trying to survive a world gone mad. The war ended in 1945. But peace was built in places like those ranches, in those kitchens, in those moments when a Texas woman handed a German prisoner an apron and said, "You'll be staying in the room upstairs," away from wire, away from guards, towards something resembling home. That's where wars actually end, not in history books, in homes.